Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. It's what they taught me to say when I was a little kid. I'm a Gen Xer. Maybe you heard something similar. Right? They're just words. They can't hurt you. Big deal. Right? We know now, I think looking back, that words can oftentimes shape and form and hurt us much longer than a bruise can last, or even a broken bone. Words spoken at us or to us, especially by people we love or people of influence in our lives, can mold us for the rest of our lives. Words and phrases and experiences that we carry with us to our deathbed sometimes, that last far longer than any physical injury. Sticks and stones can break our bones, but words can affect me forever. We know with recent testimony before Congress and many people in the social media world that the algorithms created in social media are intended to form us and mold us in a very powerful, intentional way, in a very manipulative way. We know that we've learned that anger is the one emotion that elicits the most response and clicking. And the more we click on our different social media apps and the longer we stay on them, the more they make money. And if it makes us really angry, as long as they make money, they're perfectly fine with it. And the government hasn't done anything about it so far. We've been manipulated so often through social media and other means. And the question is, what voice are we listening to? I remember growing up, music had a profound impact on how I saw the world. I would listen to certain songs or musicians for hours on end, even in a day. And what they sang about, what they spoke about, what they envisioned shaped how I saw the world, how I thought of myself, and how I viewed others. We have all maybe used music to motivate us to exercise or to get us hyped for a game or something. We know how powerful music can be to shape our way of thinking and how we feel. There's so many factors competing for our attention, so many things we listen to and watch and look at that mold and shape how we think. So many voices competing for our time with the best of science and technology to manipulate our way of seeing the world, ourselves and others. And today, as we celebrate this solemnity of Christ the King, we are forced to ask ourselves, whose voice is most shaping how I see myself and the world? What are the words and phrases that I'm constantly being bombarded with, that I allow myself to be bombarded with, that shape and form how I see my life in the world? Jesus told Pontius Pilate, "Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." But add up the minutes. You know, on my iPhone, it shows me exactly how many minutes on every single app I spend every day on my phone. It's summarized, and per week, down to the minute. And I can see just how many hours a day or minutes I spent on this or that or the other. And think about how many minutes do we spend a day or a week watching television, listening to music, on social media apps, and then compare that to how many minutes a day or a week we spend listening to prayer or praying or reading the scriptures. I fear to think that there's no comparison, that the voices that compete for our time and take up the vast majority of it are not that of Christ. It is not a biblical worldview. It's something else. Are we aware, are we cognizant of how we're being manipulated and influenced? How we maybe choose or don't choose because of verbal abuse, emotional abuse, the influences that impact and shape and mold who I am, how I see the world, how I see them or the other or us. It's a major problem today that's dividing our country like never before. We see it play out in politics and in courtrooms. But at the end of the day, what is ruling our heart? What's the underlying message and voice that shapes and molds and guides my way of seeing the world and myself? I fear that the voice of Christ is losing, and he can't compete unless we make an active, conscious choice to listen to his voice and to allow his truth to inform us. At a time when it is popular, accepted, and encouraged to say, well, that's your truth, and this is my truth, and everybody has their own truth. You should be true to your truth. Pilate said it. What is truth? What does that mean? Pilate didn't realize that truth is embodied and personified and divine and real in Jesus Christ. He stood before Jesus and said, what is truth? Because he could not recognize God before him. Christ chose to lay down his life. The message we'll hear in these next 4 weeks of Advent throughout the entire Archdiocese of Denver, as an archdiocese walking toward mission, from maintenance to mission, walking on this journey of personal conversion, we begin by hearing the story of salvation, maybe for the first time. We've always grown up Catholic, maybe we went to religious ed or even Catholic schools, but have we really heard the story of the Kerygma, the story of our salvation? In the next 4 weeks, we'll hear about first how God created us as a pure extension of his love, and all that he created in the world is for us, out of love for us, and that we've been created in his image and likeness. In the second Sunday of Advent, we'll hear the story of how we've all been captured by sin and enslaved. Insofar as we've suffered, experienced evil and sickness, death, drought, fires, you name it, we know what it's like to be captured by evil. And in the third Sunday of Advent, we'll hear the story and the message of how Christ rescues us from this. He doesn't free us from suffering and sickness and death and war and drought and fire and famine, but he helps us live above it, listening to his voice and the good news that this will end one day, and that while we live suffering like everyone else, guided by Christ, we're able to do something different in the world, to make his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, knowing that we'll never be perfect until we're in his kingdom. And in the fourth Sunday of Advent, we'll hear this message of responding, created, captured, rescued, and now having been rescued, what is our response? As in any relationship, it takes two to love. And we hear the story of God creating us in love, of us falling into sin, of us being rescued, but what is our response? How do we respond to Christ loving us, his initiative, to live as missionary disciples in our diocese and in our world? Christ suffered, died, and rose from the dead and ascended to the right hand of the Father to save us. But in order for us to hear that message and to be able to live it and respond, and first and foremost to experience it, we've got to ask, whose voice am I listening to? In Christ's own time, as he stands before Pilate in judgment, he spoke the truth. He was the truth, and many did not listen to him. But what is profound and impactful is the fact that even though many of his followers did not listen to him, many in the synagogue did not listen to him, many in the Roman Empire refused to believe him, he continued to do what he did because he was being true to himself. He wasn't reacting, well, if they're not going to follow, then forget it, I'm going home, right? No, if they're not going to respond to what I said and do the right thing, then I quit, I'm doing something else. No, he remained faithful to the Father's plan in his life because he would never allow anything or anyone to change who he was, in spite of how they are, in spite of how they treated him, in spite of how they reacted to him. He did what he did because he would be faithful to himself no matter what, even death. Who are we? Who am I? What are the lies that I've heard throughout my life? Names I've been called, bullying, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, that still shape and mold how I see myself and others? What are the lies and the vision of the world that influences us in terms of how we feel and how we react to others, be it music or social media or television? Are we willing to make a fundamental choice to say, Lord, your voice alone is the truth, and I will listen to you above all things? I will make your voice the number one thing I hear when I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed and throughout my day. It's an invitation to consider living out of a biblical worldview. Not that the Bible and science are opposed. The same God who reveals himself in Scripture is the same God who created the heavens and the earth. But the scientific method is very limited in its tools and how it tries to understand reality. And there's so much that we're still learning that science doesn't understand. Faith builds on reason. Religion and science are not opposed because they have their same author and origin, God himself. How are we living? Whose voice are we listening to? Because so much in the world today accuses Christ and accuses us. What have you done? Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, what have you done? That's the voice of the evil one, the accuser of our brothers who night and day accuse them before God, as Revelations describes Satan. Jesus' voice is very different. He says, what do you want me to do for you? He said it to Bartimaeus. He said it to the woman suffering the hemorrhage. Time and again throughout scriptures, Satan says, what have you done? But the voice of Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? Whose voice do we hear? Whose voice do we impose upon ourselves? Whose voice are we willing to listen to? Whether we ignore Jesus or follow him, he will always be the Alpha and the Omega. He will always be King. He will always be a faithful witness. The choice is ours. Can you hear his voice over the shouts and the noise of so many other manipulating influences? Will you listen to his voice, revealed in sacred scripture and tradition, and preeminently spoken in the context of the Mass? And in hearing his question to you and his invitation and initiative of love, how do you choose to respond? We've all been broken down by the accuser. What have you done? We've even called it Catholic guilt, and there's nothing Catholic about it. But Christ, our King, reveals his power by humbling himself and becoming a servant to the sinner. He asks you and I today and invites us to walk with him in the weeks ahead. What do you want me to do for you? Tell him, answer him, and sit and wait, and let the King who reigns allow himself to be your servant. Because the good news is that his power is shown through self-giving love. And when we accept that gift, we become like him, faithful witnesses in the world, people who belong to the truth because we've listened to his voice.